Good evening. We are members of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Nashua, the UUs. Thank you for inviting us here tonight to bring you the story of the Campbell family. Jeffrey and Marguerite Campbell grew up in Nashua, New Hampshire in the early 1900s and attended the Nashua Universalist Church with their mother, Lillian Campbell. As adults, Jeffrey became a Universalist, then a Unitarian Universalist minister, and Marguerite worked for the Unitarian Universalist Association in Boston for many years. Despite their commitment to our UU faith, they all faced racism and discrimination from Universalists, Unitarian Universalists, and the institutions of our faith throughout their lives because they were Black. We UUs like to think that our spiritual ancestors have always been on the right side of history. However, the recent rediscovery of the Campbell family story, long buried in our city cemetery and our archives, reveals that we have not always lived up to our principles. We are here with you tonight as part of our work towards repentance and repair. Let us tell you their story.
Jeffrey Worthington Campbell was born in Boston on March 1st, 1910. His father, Jeffrey Sr., was Black and made his living as a commercial traveler. Jeffrey's mother, Lillian, was white. Her marriage caused a significant rift in her relationship with much of her family. Jeffrey's sister, Marguerite, was born 6 years later in 1916. Jeffrey Sr. was killed in a racially motivated attack when Jeffrey was 12. We have not been able to learn any details, unfortunately, about what actually happened. The family moved to Nashua, New Hampshire around 1919. Young Jeffrey, after doing some church shopping with his mother and sister, decided to attend the local Universalist church. Jeffrey, Marguerite, and Lillian became active members of their Universalist church, but almost from the beginning of their time there, Jeffrey remembers suspicious whispers about him and his sister as the only Black children at the church. In the extensive essay that Jeffrey wrote much later, entitled "Personality, Not Pigmentation," he describes some of his early experiences of prejudice at the Nashua Universalist Church. By the time I was 12 years of age, the paradox between intention and action of Universalism was shaking that little church. Self-satisfied, middle-class people that they were, they had nevertheless been attracted by a faith which preached the fatherhood of God and the universal brotherhood of man. That message had struck sufficiently deeply for them to realize that they could not preach or accept that belief while excluding the only youngster of mixed parentage in the neighborhood. With each stage of my development, the paradox grew sharper. Should I take a role in this or that pageant? What would the conference say if I were to represent the church? Should I be asked to teach a class? Would it be safe to hold box socials where anyone's daughter might... ... Despite this, the Campbells remained involved in the church, and when Jeffrey was 13, he and his mother officially joined as members.
After graduating from Nashua High School, Jeffrey Campbell was accepted to the theological school at St. Lawrence University in upstate New York. He was the first African American to enter this school, and his presence immediately presented a challenge and a soul searching within the Universalist denomination. The dean of St. Lawrence, John Murray Atwood, did recognize Jeffrey's gifts and believed he should be given a chance. However, denominational officials were less sure it was worthwhile to support Jeffrey on his path to ministry. In the essay, Personality, Not Pigmentation, Jeffrey wrote of his experience with the committee that granted him fellowship as a minister. He wrote, "I shall never forget the Committee on Fellowship, which examined me for ordination. 30 minutes on my theology and 4 hours on my politics and racial attitudes. Finally, the committee voted ordination. It did so with more travail of spirit. They wanted their church to be the kind of institution which could unite its theory with its practice. Inwardly, they knew it was not, nor within the limits of their imagination could they see it becoming such. Failure to ordain me would have been an even more flagrant confession of that same failure. Ordination and search for a settlement was also a difficult path for Jeffrey. The Winthrop, New York Universalist Church wrote to the National Universalist Office asking about whether or not they should ordain Jeffrey. The response to this question from the superintendent, Roger Etz, was less than enthusiastic. He said, "Personally, I have no color prejudice, and theoretically, there should not be any in our churches. Practically speaking, however, there is bound to be. I hardly know what to advise in regard to this ordination. Of course, if it is carried through, he will expect us to try to find him a church, and frankly, I don't know where he can be located. My own feeling is that this problem ought to have been faced squarely by the school long ago, and that it was a mistake to let him feel he could finish his course and then secure a church."
The superintendent, Roger Etz, was not far off in his predictions. After Jeffrey Campbell was ordained as a minister in 1935, he was unable to find a permanent position in ministry. Even though he had supported and even glowing recommendations from people who knew him, still his race overshadowed all other considerations of his resume. At times, Jeffrey was even attacked by other Universalists for his desire to serve as a Universalist minister. John Van Schaik, editor of the Universalist publication The Christian Leader, wrote in an editorial in 1940 that, quote, "It is fine if a young colored man desires to enter a white theological school to get an education and has as his ideal the service of his race. If, however, he despises his race, wants nothing to do with it, insists that he intends to join the white race, serve white churches, marry a white girl, we should tell him to go elsewhere." End quote. Though he did not mention Jeffrey by name, the reference was clear. During the mid-1930s, Jeffrey supported himself with part-time and temporary positions, in the process becoming an activist and a leader in the Universalist Youth Ministry. In 1939, Jeffrey won a fellowship to study theology in England from the peace organization Fellowship of Reconciliation. World War II began shortly after he arrived in England. During the war, Jeffrey declared himself a conscientious objector and supported himself after his fellowship expired by teaching returning soldiers and their families.
After his return to the United States in 1951, Jeffrey Campbell took a position teaching English literature at the Putney School in Vermont. He remained on the faculty there for the rest of his life, while also trying repeatedly to gain a full-time position as a UU minister. He never succeeded. The closest Jeffrey came to a settled ministry was as a part-time minister at the UU Society of Amherst, Massachusetts, from 1967 to 1974. This was a period of great civil rights upheaval in American society and within the UU faith. For the UUs, this turmoil reached a peak in 1969 at the annual all-denomination leadership convention known as the UU General Assembly. During this momentous assembly, the Black Affairs Council, or BAC, walked out of the session as a protest over funding and over Black empowerment issues in a predominantly white faith organization. It was at General Assembly in 1969 that Jeffrey Campbell presented the prestigious sermon at the Service of the Living Tradition. His sermon was entitled, "The Road of Every Man." No copy of that sermon has been found. From Amherst, Jeffrey went on to serve as on-call minister for the Unitarian Universalist Church of Brattleboro, Vermont. This was a position for which he was not paid. Something that Jeffrey wrote near the end of his life, in a letter to his friend, Reverend Dottie Spurl, was that he had never been invited to preach from his home pulpit, here in Nashua's Unitarian Universalist Church, our church.
Jeffrey was not the only Campbell to suffer from racial prejudice and discrimination at the hands of Universalists and Unitarian Universalists. His sister Marguerite encountered similar resistance. When the Unitarian Universalist Church was able to get in touch with one of Jeffrey Campbell's daughters 5 years ago, Jocelyn wrote us a letter. In it, she referred to her Aunt Marguerite as the saddest woman I have ever known. At the age of 23, Marguerite Campbell married Francis Davis, and her brother Jeffrey officiated the wedding in 1939. Her husband, Francis Davis, was a white man who studied theology at St. Lawrence University, along with Jeffrey. The editor of the Christian Leader, John Van Schaik, published an editorial in response to that wedding. His article condemned so-called mixed marriages because of the hardships they cause on the children. The editorial was a thinly veiled attack on the Davis-Campbell wedding, and more specifically, Jeffrey's role as officiant of this wedding. In his editorial, John Van Schaik wrote, "Would it be right to withhold a Universalist pulpit from a man who has contracted a marriage of this kind? It would be right, because the man cannot do the work." In a letter to the Christian Leader in 1942, 3 years later, the dean of St. Lawrence University, John Murray Atwood, noted that Marguerite's husband, Francis Davis, still had no ministry. Francis had good skills and ability, he pointed out, in addition to there being a shortage of credentialed Universalist ministers at that time. So Dean Atwood concluded that this lack of ministry for Francis could only be because of the racism directed at his wife, Marguerite. Indeed, Francis Davis instead became a social worker because, much like Marguerite's brother Jeffrey, Francis too never found a ministry. Like her brother, Marguerite was dedicated to the Universalist denomination. In the 1950s, Marguerite began to work with the Universalist Christian Association and continued to serve the denomination after the merger at the newly formed Unitarian Universalist Association. Marguerite only retired from this work shortly before her death in 1982. There's not as much documentation about Marguerite's life as there is about Jeffrey's. We know even less about their mother, Lillian. We know Lillian's husband was murdered because he was a Black man. And we know she served as the Nashua Universalist Church secretary for a few years. We're left to wonder, what did Lillian Campbell endure as the white, widowed single parent of 2 Black children? What were her joys and what were her troubles?
Throughout his life, Jeffrey Campbell did not hesitate to name the racism and discrimination that he experienced at the hands of Universalists and Unitarian Universalists. He referred to this racism perhaps most publicly in his 1940 article for the Christian Leader entitled "Personality, Not Pigmentation." He wrote this article at age 30 in response to the editor's racist attack on him. In his article, Jeffrey writes of many instances of paradox between the intention and action that he had experienced in the Universalist denomination. On one hand, here was a faith that speaks of a belief in the brotherhood of man. On the other hand, the actions of people in the faith are saying something different altogether. As Jeffrey put it in his article, it's the refusal of men to act on the reality of their common brotherhood, which has produced the hell in which we blindly struggle today. Throughout the article, Jeffrey writes not only of his disappointment in Universalism to live up to its ideals, but also in his unwavering faith that as a denomination, it's worth supporting nonetheless. He describes Universalists as a band of men and women who, in the increasing chaos, can see a new heaven and a new earth. And it is clear that he writes this article because he really believes Universalism can and should become the faith it declares itself to be.
Jeffrey and Marguerite are not the only Black Unitarian Universalists who have seen what our UU faith could be and seen it fail time and time again to live up to that vision. This is a common story, more common than we would like to admit. One of the reasons that UUs across the country are working to confront the racism and white supremacy in our midst is because we know this legacy and because we know we can and should do better. The Campbell family narrative came to light for us in 2017 as we all discussed the very interesting book, Darkening the Doorways, Black Trailblazers and Missed Opportunities in Unitarian Universalism. The book is edited by the Reverend Mark Morrison Reed, and it devotes an entire chapter to Jeffrey and Marguerite. We created a study group at the UU Church of Nashua to learn more about them, and we began to scour our church archives, the local newspaper, and the Harvard Divinity School. This effort led to fuller understanding of Jeffrey and Marguerite's struggles against racial bias. Eventually, we discovered, in what seemed like the ultimate cancellation of their life's work, that Lillian, Marguerite, and Jeffrey were buried together, right here in Nashua's Edgewood Cemetery, in an unmarked grave. So, between 2017 and today, we in the UU Church of Nashua have been working for repentance and repair. We've been telling the story of the Campbell family. We've located their gravesite in the Edgewood Cemetery. We've raised funds to create a grave marker. We've held a dedication ceremony there as we solemnly placed that new marker on their grave. We named our chapel the Campbell Chapel. We apologized to Jeffrey's daughters, and we continue to raise money for the movement known as Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism. All of these are concrete steps that we take to honor these spiritual ancestors of ours. The executive vice president of the Unitarian Universalist Association, Carrie McDonald, participated in the memorial and dedication service that we held here in September 2018. He apologized on behalf of the UU denomination to Jocelyn Campbell, Jeffrey's daughter, who attended. We wanted to share a short clip of that apology now.
Good afternoon. I'm Carrie McDonald. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Unitarian Universalist Association, the headquarters and central organization of the 1,000-plus UU congregations and communities across this country. We're located in Boston. I want to offer, on behalf of the UUA, a humble apology to Jeffrey, Marguerite, Lillian, Francis, their family. Their daughter Jocelyn is here today. I apologize. I apologize for the slanderous words that we printed in our publications. I apologize for the ways in which we did not help these reverends find a pulpit and for not honoring their ministry properly. But I also need to say thank you. Thank you for believing in us, for believing in this faith, for casting your lot with us, because I know it cost you dearly. I can only imagine what would have been illuminated had the brilliant light of these ancestors been permitted to shine to its fullest. May we choose a different path as a congregation and a community and a wider faith that allows us to live up to the aspiration that you had for us. Thank you.
It was a powerful apology, but all those concrete steps that we've taken are meaningless unless we continue the work of transformation. We must make sure that if we are ever in the same situation again, we make different choices. That transformation into a different kind of person or a different kind of institution that wouldn't perpetrate the same kind of harm again may be the work of a lifetime. We have carried the story of the Campbell family to many UU churches in New Hampshire and Vermont, but our work of repentance and repair for the actions of our spiritual ancestors towards the Campbell family is not over. We must continue to speak about Jeffrey and Marguerite. When our children in the faith formation classes ask, or when visitors to our church ask, who are the Campbells? We must tell about them. We also need to bring the Campbell family story to a wider audience than just our UU community, exactly as we are doing tonight. We can honor the Campbells by continuing our work to dismantle white supremacy in our congregation, in our faith, and in society at large. Jeffrey Campbell saw what our UU faith could be if we truly lived out our ideals. Let us honor him by working to make it so.